Jackie Dean.
Yes, thank you, Mr Speaker. The Arms Military-Style Semi-Automatic Firearms and Import Controls Amendment Bill is clearly about arms safety, and I don't think anybody across the House or indeed any member of the Law and Order Select Committee will be at odds with that basic principle. Indeed, Mr Cosgrove's contribution just now confirms that. I suspect we will have broad agreement about the requirements of this bill to capture elements of firearms safety for many reasons. We know that these military-style semi-automatic firearms and replica firearms are used in the passage of crime. That doesn't make life easy for the police, and so therefore we need to do some work on that. It seems to me, and having a look at the bill for the first time, there is a need to define what is meant by a semi-automatic, military-style semi-automatic firearm as opposed to a sporting configuration. Now, I would imagine, Mr Speaker, and you may well know this as well, that a sporting configuration means that you hold it to your shoulder and go out and shoot ducks with it and other pursuits, and so that is a sporting configuration. The pistol grip configuration, on the other hand, is something which I imagine says, as it is described, as it's something which is held in the hand but is not balanced against the shoulder and is used. No, you see, already I'm finding myself wallowing in the mire of not understanding the definition between pistol grip and a sporting configuration. That's exactly why we need to have a good select committee process in examining the contents of this bill. What I do understand, though, Mr Speaker, is that the inclusion of the definition of pistol grip in regulation provides some flexibility going forward so that when there are different manufacturing standards around pistol grips, that can be encapsulated so that manufacturers of pistol grip firearms can't get themselves ahead of the legislation. The legislation is anticipating different styles of pistol grip. I think the gentleman that came to see me around a year ago now in Waimate, very concerned about air pistols and replica firearms, I think he had a very important message for me, and I certainly listened to him with a great deal of close attention, and he had a great and genuinely held concern about the number of firearms that were coming into New Zealand by way of, and he had quite a thick magazine or catalogue of these firearms. His concern was that there was little regulation around the import of those firearms. Now, that gentleman, I listened to him with close interest and in fact raised the issue in government and was able to tell him that yes, there was some work being done on this issue, and indeed here we are this evening with the first reading. But I noticed that that his concerns will also be addressed within the contents of this bill. My contribution will be short because clearly the Select Committee process will be spending a lot of time receiving expert advice on the contents of this bill. I too hope we have a number of submitters. I will be listening to them very closely. This is a good bill. We must remember the reason this bill has been brought to the House, that is this government's desire to enhance firearm safety, and I commend the bill to the House.
Lewisa Wall.
Kia ora, Mr Speaker. I want to reiterate what my colleague, the Honourable Clayton Cosgrove, says as a member of the Law and Order Select Committee, and I have aspirations to be on that committee. Very esteemed, I agree. So Labor supports the Arms Military-Style Semi-Automatic Firearms and Import Controls Amendment Bill, which amends the Arms Act 1983 to change the definitions and regulations around what constitutes a military-style semi-automatic firearm. Given I had an opportunity to speak about this, I thought I would do a little bit of research, and I actually found an article by Greg Newbold from the University of Canterbury, and it was about the criminal use of firearms in New Zealand. So it's quite interesting looking back at our history. So the foundations of New Zealand's arms legislation was laid with the passage of the Arms Act in 1920, and this act provided for the registration of firearms to specific owners. So it was very much about the firearm being aligned to a specific owner, and this endured up until 1983. The police kept a record of all firearm owners, the weapons they possessed and where they lived, and then in the fruition of time they decided that we should have a bit of a review. So in the 60s and 70s, an arms check revealed that approximately 7% of all registered rifles could not be located, and that up to 36% of registered certificates contained errors. So that spawned the development of a new bill. So in 1983 we had a new Arms Act which was drafted, and it was about deregistering all firearms except pistols and restricted weapons owned by people such as collectors, but then firearms users were then registered. So there was a bit of a change in philosophy, and I guess over time these things have to occur. And then the most recent amendments came after the tragic Aramoana massacre. So we know that in 1990 there was that unfortunate event in our history, but that in turn provided another opportunity for us as a country to look at our firearms legislation. And what I found really interesting, this is one of those fun facts that your research people or our research people are able to find out for us. So during that 1992 amendment to the Arms Act, the Labour opposition considered that the balance between the safety of the public and reasonable users of firearms to be able to pursue their work or sport without unnecessary restriction was not struck properly. And actually many speeches in the House stated that there was no legitimate sporting use for any MSSAs, and that they should be completely banned. And actually now we're obviously in another place in our history where we have an opportunity to debate that fact. So I just want to reiterate the background to this piece of legislation and why the Labour Party is going to support it. So the government has asserted that police estimates indicates that there could be up to one incident a week where a member of the public presents an air gun that looks like a real pistol or an MSSA or restricted weapon, requiring an armed police response. And sometimes involving our armed offender squads. I was fortunate a couple of weeks ago to go out with the police in Manurewa, and I know what a sterling job that they do. So we would support any measure that ensures their safety and obviously ensures the safety of all New Zealanders. So it's a good opportunity again for us to assess the relevance of our firearms legislation and whether or not it's in protecting New Zealanders, whilst at the same time ensuring that those who use firearms are able to do so that their liberties aren't at all compromised. I'd like to also note that the change to the definition of MSSAs is necessary, it seems, because of a 2010 High Court decision, Lincoln versus the Police, which created uncertainty as to whether some semi-automatic firearms were MSSAs or not. So obviously this provides us with an opportunity as a country to debate that and to be very clear about what is and what isn't, so that there is no ambiguity, and obviously to again ensure that our police and the people who are there to serve and protect our communities have the powers and the tools that they need to do their jobs. So under the current law, a semi-automatic firearm in sporting configuration is not considered an MSSA. Therefore, those with a firearms licence can own and use them without the need for an additional endorsement from the police, as is the case with MSSAs. So I hope to be on the Select Committee that has an opportunity to have this bill go through the committee, and I look forward to obviously the engagement with members of the community who this piece of legislation is relevant to. Kia ora. Thank you.
Shane Ardern.
Mr. Speaker, it's a pleasure to rise and speak on